So micromobility is the fun kind of mobility, the one that's growing really fast right now, and lots of things are changing. It's an honor to have Horace, the inventor of the term micromobility, on stage along with everybody else. So I'm going to try and make this panel fun, entertaining. I think there are lots of opinions. The thing about micromobility is it doesn't inspire micro-emotion, it inspires macro-emotion. Amongst my friend group, there are some people who love scooters, and there's some people like my housemate who hate scooters, and I don't know anybody in between. It's a very polarized issue. It's gone the way of politics today, globally, and it's spread globally like politics. So I think there's a lot to discuss, and I think there are going to be different opinions on stage, and I'm going to try and get that conversation going and see the different range of opinions. So one thing I think that's funny, I'll start with Facebook. Facebook reminds you, on a periodic basis that it has like photos of you and tracks all your data. And last week it popped up, it surfaced a photo from 2 years ago with me and my partner Mike at Maniv riding on Telefon e-bicycles, normal bicycles, slow bicycles, across Tel Aviv. And that was kind of novel for us, so we posted about it. 2 years later, it seems a complete anachronism that we were driving on these bicycles. Now that we've got 4 or 3, it's hard to tell exactly, scooter operators operating across Tel Aviv. And a large portion of those companies actually represented here on stage. So there's been a huge shift in what's happened in Israel over the last few years. Obviously, there was a shift before, a lot of e-bikes and scooters that were privately owned before that. So there's a lot that's changing very rapidly. So given that so much has changed over such a short period of time, maybe it's interesting to start kind of highlighting, to kind of get a question out there of where we are in the process of the shift. Are there enough scooters on the streets? Are there enough cars in Tel Aviv? Should there be less of one? Should there be more of the other? Should we have a cap on the number of scooters, or are we nowhere near the right amount of scooters? Eric, do you want to start?
Sure. I think this is a very, thanks for the introduction. I think the market, especially in Tel Aviv in Israel, we're seeing such a tremendous adoption of scooter. You see all these scooters on the streets being used. We're seeing a very good usage in this market. And I think we're still early in the scooter adoption. I would say Israel is probably a year or two ahead of other market in terms of adapting to scooter. But we've seen other market across Europe start to catch up. But I would say, there's still substantial demand in terms of more scooter usage and different form factor as well. Where we've seen that our new generation scooter versus the old generation scooter had much more demand. So that gives an indication that the scooter feels safer, feels it's bigger, right? So when you run over a pothole, it's not like you're gonna get thrown off. There's double brake, etc. So all these factors is bringing more demand to the market, so more usage to the market. So I think we're still overall at the early days of as we have more car ride usage change into a scooter usage, or taxi usage change to scooter usage. So and then Israel and then Tel Aviv is probably one of the most exciting places to be.
So Mital, do we have too many scooters or too few?
Well, if I'm speaking about Tel Aviv, we have a vision. Until 2025, we want to have 25% of the moving in the city, the driving and everything will be based on the micromobility, on bike and on scooter. So at the moment, we are going up with the use of it. 1 of 4 is a scooter. We have more bike and more private micromobility than shared micromobility. We are in the beginning, in the start of a big change. It's not only a change that says moving from cars to micromobility. It's also a change that says moving from owning the car and owning the micromobility to using it as a service. And that's the main things, I think, that those companies like Wind and Lime and Beard that working in Tel Aviv are bringing a new way of using the tools to move. No need to own it anymore. You can use it without owning it. It's very important.
So you said by 2025, a quarter of trips in Tel Aviv will be on micromobility?
At the moment, we speak about 16% of this in the center of Tel Aviv, 8% when we look at all Tel Aviv. We have a big mission to do. It won't be simple, but we are working on it, even with thinking from beginning about how we divide the public space for the use and the vision that we have. At the moment, about 10% of Tel Aviv is for road, okay, road and space, but only which bring us about 5,000 dunam, but only 2% of it, only 200 dunam is for bike line. So we have a big work to share in a democratic way the public space and to share it so it will serve our vision and the way we want the people to move in Tel Aviv. Less car, more alternatives.
And just to understand the shift, you said the goal is 25%. What percentage of trips are right now on micromobility? How far along are we to that
As
transformation?
I said, it's 16% in the center of Tel Aviv and 8% when you look at all Tel Aviv. So we have a big work to do, because when we speak about 25%, we don't speak about the center of Tel Aviv. We speak about all Tel Aviv. Even the neighborhood that doesn't use today so much the scooter and the micromobility, and we want really to educate people to change the attitude of moving in Tel Aviv, and especially because all the infrastructure work that we have and the train that are arriving to Tel Aviv, first of all, we have a mess in the street with the traffic jam, and people will be forced to move differently. But second, when we will have all those ability to move differently by the rail train and everything, still we will have the last mile to work with something else than car, because we have less and less parking in Tel Aviv and more problem with parking, and that's one of the forces that will push people to give the cars and to move to alternatives.
Caroline, you look at the whole of EMEA. How do different cities across the region compare to one another, and how do you see Tel Aviv within that landscape?
Yeah, sure. So Tel Aviv is a really special city for us because it's the first city that we actually launched outside of the US, and we were the first operator here in this city, which is over a year ago now. The reason we decided to launch in this market, and some of the special things about this market are, it's a city of early adopters, it's a city of technophiles, it's a very young market. So I think it's something like 60% of the population are under 40. The weather's great. And people already started adopting these alternative modes of transportation here. When you look around on the streets of Tel Aviv, it's a place where, I've never seen anywhere like it in the world, where people have really adopted all of these different forms of modality as alternatives to the car, genuine alternatives to the car. And that's something that we see here that is very different from any other market I've seen in EMEA or really across the world, and that's something that's really special. Another thing is, every city across EMEA has the same problem, which is too much congestion, not enough space to park cars, too many emissions, and that's something that every city is trying to solve, and that we will collectively have to solve. So that's something that's consistent across the region. Tel Aviv specifically is very congested, so there's something like 500,000 cars right now in Tel Aviv. By 2025, that's projected to double to 1 million cars coming into the city every single day. If we compare that to the total number of scooters on the street right now, shared scooters, all companies, it's about 7,000. 7,000 versus 500,000. So, as said, we're really only at the beginning of this. You know, all of those things about congestion and the need to solve this and to work together with the city to grow what we're doing are still all completely true. It's just that Tel Aviv, as Eric said, seems to be a year or two ahead of everyone else.
So Horace, when you arrive in Tel Aviv and put on your micromobility glasses, how does the city look to you, and what's maybe unique and interesting about it?
I'd like to echo the points made that Tel Aviv is an early adopter city, and it's pretty clear that it's not just in micromobility, but also in other technologies. Historically, in mobile, for example, this was the place where a lot of things were pioneered, and first kind of 1% of the world was here. The other thing that's interesting and amusing is that it's kind of a little bit scrappy, a little bit less regulated, if that's the right word, or regimented. And so it's very kind of dynamic, and things happen in an ad hoc manner. Which is good. This is what you need for innovation. It's also one of the places that begins to regulate before anyone else when they see things go wrong. So it's a great, I think technology in general, it's a great embryonic place. But perhaps the flip side of that, it tends to develop into its own Galapagos, its own ecosystem that tends not to scale or be quickly adopted elsewhere because things are happening so quickly. And so as a result, many pioneers in Israel may struggle to replicate. So in the case of micromobility, actually, though there was early adoption here with e-bikes, we had the major brands in micro today actually emerging in the US. That is something to think about.
Yeah, or Europe, as we kind of see represented on stage. There's one Israeli player, but it's, Leo that is not, I guess, the dominant player in the market. And besides that, everything is coming from abroad and from the outside, right? So do you think, Michal, do you think Israel's failed to export micromobility and to leverage the wave? Like, how has your life shifted from, 2 years ago, nobody was zipping around the streets of Tel Aviv on a shared scooter platform, but lots of people were on e-bikes back then. How is the world different between then and now? And do you think Israel could have been a center for the development of these technologies? Do you think we missed something?
First of all, my life has changed. I'm attacked all the time for allowing those micromobility to work in the city. So whenever something new is coming, there is forces that are against it. I'm sure that it will be also with the autonomous cars and all kind of other stuff. Every morning when I'm going to work and I'm counting the scooters and the bike in the way, I tell myself, even if only 10% of them is instead of cars, we win something big. And I think that if you speak also about justice and giving ability for people to move from one place to others in a simple way, which is handy, very easy to use, not expensive. We're doing great things with it, and I think that slowly the attitude in the city is changing. And today I'm working very hard on making a new line for bike, because if we won't have infrastructure, we will talk about the safety as something that will damage these great things. We must ensure that the people can move in a safe way also, not into pedestrian, because the pedestrian area belongs to the walker, so it's on the road, and we don't have enough kilometer of bike lines and not enough kilometer of slow road. So we are working on it. It's our plan today, and it's one of the main issues that make me busy in my day, how to make it work better. I must say that the company are cooperative. For example, we have a new demand that will go on them in the next week or this week even, we are going to ask them to put line numbers or sign on the micromobility, the shared micromobility, so we can identify a person that do something wrong. And it's not really to enforce, but it will give us some power to know better about you, about your clients, us about the places where the unlegal stuff are happening, like riding not in the high pace. And I must say that it's our ongoing project, and all the time we have to improve it and to learn from each other and from the world how to do it better, because this is the future. Back to the Future 7, I think.
So Eric, from your perspective, it'd be interesting to hear what your experiences working with Tel Aviv are compared to other places, how you feel about the kinds of regulation, the kinds of restrictions on your service that have been imposed over the last few months. Do they make the service better, or do they make your life difficult, or maybe a little bit of both? What's that experience been like?
Sure. I'll just make two comments. One is on the previous, that even though there's no homegrown micromobility service provider in Tel Aviv, but the technologies that Israeli startup develop is really important. Like for instance, we talk about using a camera on the scooter to detect sidewalk or not, and then we talk actually with one of the managed portfolio company who's capable to identify those, it's on asphalt street or not. So I think those technology are super helpful for a provider like ours to leverage the Israeli ecosystem here. And then second is your question on how we as a service provider work with the city. I think we from day one we work with the Tel Aviv city, and I would say we have seen the spectrum of different type of regulation. I would say the regulation that we see in Tel Aviv is actually very helpful, because what we're seeing is there's two type of customer we have. There's an end user, right? The user who uses scooter, and they're the cities, right? The city obviously want a clean street, nicely parked scooter, as well as doesn't ride on the sidewalk. I would say Tel Aviv city is very much in the camp that try to do this properly. And for instance, now we have a parking spot within the city center of Tel Aviv, right? Especially on the beach line. And although from a user perspective, it's not completely free floating, but it is helping with the parking situation, is helping with, so the scooter doesn't litter around. I would say maybe move forward, we can have a bit more parking spot. So this way, then you really have a good density, so it's still easy for user to have that almost A to B type of point-to-point mobility, but at the same time, the sidewalk is not as cluttered, because currently some of the parking spot, there may be too many scooter parked in that one spot, so it might overflow. But beyond that, I think these are more minor. So, from a regulatory standpoint, we think, I think those are very good for us to collectively build a good micromobility service for both for the end user and for the city.
Horace, when you look at these kind of trade-offs on the regulatory side, how do you think about them? And also shifts in micromobility, do you think the current platforms that are being deployed right now are the final platforms? What's the next chapter? We're only so to speak, a year in. How do you see this story evolving in terms of what forms micromobility takes? Does it consolidate? Does it spread?
A great question. First of all, let's step back and point out the fact that we are only 1 or 2 years into a completely new service, completely new technology, as assembled from components that pre-existed micromobility. It's enabled by 5 core technologies: cellular, GPS, electric motors, GIS, and lithium batteries, among other things. But these things were pre-existing micro. They just got assembled. There was no micromobility invention. Nobody said, aha, eureka, I've invented a new mode of transport. It's actually been kind of coalescing. Now, having said that, so 2 years into this, think back to the mobile phone. Where was the mobile phone industry 2 years into its its creation? Where was the computer 2 years into its creation? Very early days. And I believe that we are actually seeing a tremendous adoption. Just to go through some numbers, we have several operators who are sharing their cumulative rides data, and we're seeing adoption rates twice as fast as on-demand or ride-hailing, on-demand automobility, as I call it. So we're seeing very rapid adoption, 2-year lead times. Again, hundreds of millions of rides. What I think is happening on the device side, on the regulatory side, is very rapidly evolving as well. On the devices, we're seeing, the scooters already in the 3rd, 4th generation. Some of these operators among us here today have already been moving very rapidly on 6 months upgrade cycles on their vehicles. We're seeing regulatory. There's not even a consensus on the words to be used. There's not a consensus. There's no standards in the automotive engineering world that describe this. There are no rules at federal level for many countries that touch on this. So let's be clear about how early we are. Given the background we've seen in technology, both in adoption rates and evolution of the core, I believe that we're going to see a lot more in terms of these things becoming more and more intelligent, more and more powerful, and more safe. These are the 3 main things that are not good enough. I think in terms of safety in particular, we're going to see the use of technology, sensing, imaging, and other things to actually enable the rider to be more safe without putting more mass into the vehicle. That's actually a very clever thing to do. So, I think we're very early. I'm not going to make predictions now, although I have some, but that's a good start.
I feel like we're in the post-lunch phase, so maybe we should get some arm exercises going. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions of the audience. Since you mentioned what's unique about this is the rapid update cycles, who in the audience has tried riding one of these micromobility service scooters? Just to make sure everybody's getting some exercise. Who hasn't or refuses to?
I refuse to.
Naturally.
Well, no helmet. So dangerous.
You can get your own helmet. I've got a foldable one. You should try it. Who's used the service who loves scooters? Who really hates scooters? See, I told you, it's so polarized, isn't it? Who's received a fine? A fine. No. Ticket. It's a ticket. So I think what's interesting again about this is it affects people's lives. For me, it's changed the way I get to work. Speaking of fines and the ways in which these are enforced, you mentioned kind of the plan and that there's a shift towards scooters and restricting cars. How do you think about kind of the stick? Like Tel Aviv's handed out quite a lot of fines. How do you think about that aspect of it, the enforcement side of this, and the challenges around that, or what's necessary? Enforcement. How do you use the police to give fines to people, and how do you think about that?
Okay, well, education is a hard work, you know. You can ask and you can ask. If you don't come with forcing, sometimes people don't listen to you. I find also that the use of the shared scooter is by tourists and visitors in the city more than by residents. And it's very, very difficult to educate people that are not residents to keep the rules and the energy of the city. I think that whoever drives in Tel Aviv know that you have to watch in 10 eyes everywhere for the scooter that will come in unaccepted moment from unaccepted road in front of his car. So all of us know to drive very carefully, and we know that we have to take care of the pedestrian, and we don't scoot where there are walkers. But visitors are coming and they are welcome, and we are happy with the service, but they have to learn and in a fast way, not by study in the school for 1 year, the law of the city. So we have to enforce the law, some of it by our pakachim, our
Your people.
well,
Sometimes with
yeah,
police,
yeah.
right?
And some of it, but by the police, there is law, we have to keep it, and the law will be, if we want 25% by scooters and by bike, the law should give us a lot of answer and more answer. There is some difficulty that connected with Israel especially. I'll give you one of them, for example. One of the new law in Israel is whoever drive on scooter or bike have to study theory, to study the law of driving. However, in Israel, only people with ID can do the theory and the license of driving. So all the refugees, all the people that live in Tel Aviv without ID cannot ride in a legal way on those scooters. And in the school, since it's a new law that we have to teach theory in school, can be two students sitting one near to the other, and the foreign one, the refugee one, or whatever I will call it, he cannot, even if he will study, he will not get the license. And Israel will get the license and can ride legally. So we have all kind of problem, and we are, as I say, it's an adaptive things, and we have to, all the time, to look at the law, to change it, to go to the government, to ask for change, to do some local laws. For example, all the things that we did in Tel Aviv, it's from the local point of view. No government for 1 year already. You arrived to Tel Aviv, I think, in August. Since August, Tel Aviv is providing laws according to the need of the citizen and to the city and to our vision by ourselves, that are studied by other city and by other all over the world.
Actually, quite curious on the point with the license, which I think is pretty unique to Israel. I don't know.
We have many
maybe
unique
Caroline
stuff.
and
For example, Yom Kippur, it's a unique stuff.
So I want to talk about Yom Kippur afterwards, because I think that was quite interesting. So let's talk about those two things together. The first is Israel has a requirement that you know theory, but not necessarily have a driver's license. However, one of my colleagues who doesn't have a driver's license doesn't have a way to use Bird, even if she takes that theory test, because there's no option to input a license around theory. How do Wind and Bird think about those kinds of regulations? And then secondly, I noticed I was planning to get to my meal before the fast of Yom Kippur on a shared scooter service, got to the stand, and it was suddenly like time had gone back. It was like Groundhog Day. We'd gone back 2 years. There were no scooters anywhere to be found. There was just like tumbleweed blowing in the streets. And basically, from what I understood, the regulations had required that there be no scooters available, no services available from noon the day before the evening that Yom Kippur started on. So what was that like as an operator? What was communicated to you? How was that enforced? So how do you think about these kind of granular issues once regulation starts mixing with your platform?
Sure. So this business is hyper-local. So it's really important that we work really closely with communities, that we work with cities, that we understand sort of cultural norms. So with Yom Kippur, I mean, it was obvious. It was, a cultural thing. Every operator took the vehicles off the street, so we just took the vehicles off the street. And guess what? We do that pretty much every day anyway, for charging, for repairs, sometimes if there's bad weather. So generally, we know how to do that. So it's
for me
fine.
as a user, it was a complete surprise. I didn't know that was going to happen, and I planned around it. And from an Israel perspective on the regulatory side, a lot of people in Tel Aviv might ask, if you take the scooter service away on Yom Kippur, what about Shabbat? Like, how do you know when? Like everybody else who's got a privately owned vehicle, when can they use it, and when they can use it easily? But if it's a shared service, it can be turned off and turned on by the government.
Yeah, so it's not currently the plan for us to switch it off for Shabbat either. But these sorts of things, these sort of local things are things that, you know, we have to just take on a case-by-case basis. So going back to your question about driving licenses, so we don't do driving license checks in every market, but if a city wants us to do driving license checks, then we'll do that, because for the long-term benefit of this business and for the change that we need to create in cities, we have to have that longevity. We have to work with cities. We have to build those relationships. And so you know, we will do those things. There's obviously, for anything that's a barrier to someone riding a shared scooter, that sort of flies in the face of growth of the business, but it's a balance, and it's something that we will always take on a case-by-case basis, and that's really important to us.
Eric, anything to add over there?
I would say, yeah, we work with the city. You know, if this is required to take it off the street, we take it off the street. You know, we have a swappable battery, so our scooter is normally left on the street. So we have to find a place to put those scooters. In fact, our warehouse is not big enough to put all our scooter. So we use, you know, our chargers like warehouse and their home, etc. But I would say, you know, like this is, you know, we work with the city. This is one of the city requirement. You know, we will definitely look for fulfill with the city. But on the other side, you know, we do pay for the cost for maintenance, for warehouse, etc. So the less this type of situation happens, the less likely we will lose money, right?
Okay. Mital, I know you want to jump in. I just want to add one point in addition. Since you mentioned on the regulation, there's a need to educate. You mentioned your plan, there's the shift. How do you think about cars and enforcement around drivers alongside enforcement around scooters? In Tel Aviv, for instance, drivers of cars are a lot of the part of the danger. Subsidies towards cars in terms of parking, free on-street parking for residents. How's that part of your shift going forward? How do you think about enforcement around cars, etc., going forward?
First of all, people that own a car don't think that they have easy life in Tel Aviv, especially in the last half year. And we are going to take a lot of parking space for bike line for buses, and we are building now a strategy of parking. Today in Tel Aviv, you can get as much ticket for car as you want. If the car is on your name or the family, it will be changed. No more tickets with carrier until home, and we want to speak about the differentiation in parking and the cost of parking. We are going to make a big changes in that, as I say, to our politics. But cars is not only a politic of city. Yeah, some of it is of city. The government have big wishes that we will continue to use the car, even though they speak different, because 17% of the income in Israel to the treasure budget is from car. And until we will change that, they will continue to pay me and other workers in all the municipality, in all the government, to own a car. And that's things that doesn't exist in the world. We have to make regulation in Texas to change the attitude of people to the money, to the pockets. If we won't do that, we are playing Israbluff, what we're cheating each other, and we don't do the right things that needed to do. And I must say something. I must say something about Yom Kippur, because I'm working on transportation in Shabbat or in the weekend, and that's why I'm on my phone all the time. You will hear about it soon. I will never work for transportation in Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, it's not a status quo, it's a consensus. Now, we have a company in Tel Aviv that is a shared bike, and what they do to allow people to use the bike in Yom Kippur, that's the day of the bike and the scooter, they give the people the opportunity to rent the bike before the Yom Kippur enter until the end of Yom Kippur. So one person will use this bike in the day, or one family, in another price, okay? But they can use it. I suggest you to find a way to open the scooter before Yom Kippur and to bring the ability for people to bring it back to the road after Yom Kippur. Don't make it non-functional in the day that everyone want to be on wheels on the street.
So that's a challenge for Wind and Bird, and I guess also Lime ahead of next Yom Kippur. Is there a way to do it differently? If we want to see the plan for 2025, where can we find that online?
We're working on it. We have all team that work on it. I'll put it soon in my paper. It will go to the newspaper. We're also going to do 10 what we call Projekte Chelet, so in English it's pilot. We are going to do big work on bike in many different ways, and we are going to be a good partner to do regulation for good, for the benefit of the people and the movement of using more micromobility in Israel, not only in Tel Aviv.
Great. Thank you so much for everybody in the panel. Hopefully this was an entertaining conversation. We kind of achieved the goals, and looking forward to the shift that comes over the next year and the years to come. Thank you very much.